When 12-year-old Emma whispered those 6 words to Brad Pitt at Beverly Hills' most exclusive restaurant, she had no idea that her simple question would reduce a room full of Hollywood's elite to tears and change her life forever. Before we dive into this incredible true story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to hear more stories about unexpected acts of kindness that remind us what humanity truly means. Now let me take you back to that extraordinary evening in Los Angeles. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Rodeo Drive as Brad Pitt's black SUV pulled up to Le Bernardin, Beverly Hills, one of the city's most exclusive dining establishments. It was a Tuesday in March, and the restaurant buzzed with its usual clientele of industry executives, socialites, and celebrities conducting business over $100 entrees. Brad stepped out, his trademark casual elegance intact, despite the weight of recent personal struggles that had dominated tabloid headlines for months. His publicist had arranged this dinner meeting with studio executives to discuss his upcoming projects, a necessary evil in maintaining his career momentum during turbulent times. The maître d', greeted him with practiced discretion. "Mr. Pitt, your party is already seated at table 7. Right this way, please." As they walked through the dimly lit restaurant, Brad noticed the usual choreographed dance of recognition, heads turning subtly, whispered conversations pausing mid-sentence, phones discreetly angled for photos. He'd grown accustomed to this peculiar fishbowl existence over his 3 decades in Hollywood. Table 7 sat in a prime corner location, offering both privacy and a view of the restaurant's elegant interior. The 3 studio executives, Sarah Chen from Sony, Marcus Rodriguez from Universal, and veteran producer Janet Walsh, were already nursing their cocktails and reviewing contracts spread across the white linen tablecloth. "Brad, you look well," Janet said, rising to embrace him. The others followed suit with warm professional greetings. As they settled into discussion about his next film, a psychological thriller set in post-war Europe, Brad found his attention occasionally drifting to the large windows overlooking the street. Through the glass, he could see the usual Beverly Hills tableau: luxury cars, designer-clad pedestrians, and the occasional homeless individual seeking shelter in doorways. It was during a lull in conversation about shooting locations that Brad first noticed her. Her young girl, perhaps 11 or 12, with tangled brown hair and clothes that had seen better days. She stood at the restaurant's entrance, peering through the glass doors with an expression that wasn't curiosity, it was longing. The restaurant's security guard, a burly man named Tony, was gently but firmly encouraging her to move along. Brad watched as the girl nodded politely and stepped back, but she didn't leave. Instead, she positioned herself just outside the legal boundary of the restaurant's property, close enough to catch the aroma of gourmet meals being served within. "Brad, what do you think about Prague for the flashback sequences?" Sarah's voice pulled him back to the conversation. "Prague could work beautifully," he replied, though part of his mind remained on the girl outside. The architecture would certainly add authenticity to the period pieces. Their appetizers arrived, delicate compositions of caviar, truffle oil, and microgreens that cost more than many families spent on groceries in a week. Brad mechanically participated in the business discussion, but something about the girl's patient vigil outside had lodged itself in his consciousness. As the evening progressed and their main courses were served, Brad noticed the girl was still there. She had found a spot on a public bench just within view of the restaurant, and she wasn't begging or causing any disturbance. She was simply waiting. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he sat, surrounded by plates of food that would likely go half-eaten, while just beyond these walls, a child waited with an empty stomach. The contrast felt suddenly sharp and uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, what was that?" Brad asked, realizing Janet had been speaking to him. "I was saying that the studio is prepared to fast-track production if you can commit to the schedule. We're looking at a spring start date." Brad nodded, forcing himself to focus on the conversation that would determine his professional future for the next year. But as the minutes ticked by, he found his eyes returning to that bench, to the girl who sat with such dignity despite her obvious circumstances. What he didn't know was that in just a few minutes, that same girl would find the courage to walk through those intimidating glass doors, approach his table, and ask a question that would transform not just her evening, but her entire life. The stage was set, the players in position, and fate was about to orchestrate an encounter that would remind everyone present why simple human kindness matters more than all the wealth and fame in the world. The restaurant's atmosphere shifted subtly as the girl pushed through the heavy glass doors. Conversations didn't stop entirely, but they lowered to whispers as patrons registered the obvious disparity between this child and their usual exclusive environment. Tony, the security guard, immediately moved toward her, his expression professionally stern but not unkind. "Miss, you need to—" "Please," the girl said quietly, her voice carrying just far enough for nearby tables to hear. "I just need to ask someone something. Just one question." Philippe, the maitre d', appeared beside Tony with the swift efficiency that had earned him his position at one of Beverly Hills' most prestigious establishments. His trained eye took in the girl's appearance. Worn sneakers with holes, jeans that had been patched multiple times, and a sweater that had clearly been donated rather than purchased. "Young lady, I'm afraid this is a private establishment," Philippe said gently but firmly. "Perhaps there's somewhere else we can help you find." The girl shook her head, her brown eyes scanning the restaurant until they landed on Brad's table. Something in her expression suggested she hadn't come here randomly. She had been watching, waiting for the right moment. "I just want to ask that man," she said, pointing directly at Brad, "if I can have his leftovers when he's done." The words hung in the air like a challenge to every assumption about propriety and social boundaries. Several nearby diners stopped eating entirely, their forks suspended midway to their mouths. The request was so honest, so direct, that it bypassed all the usual social protocols that governed interactions in places like this. Brad looked up from his conversation, meeting the girl's gaze across the restaurant. Her eyes held no trace of shame or manipulation, just the straightforward honesty of someone who had identified a practical solution to hunger and was brave enough to ask for it. Sarah Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Security should really handle this," she murmured to the table, but Brad was already standing, his napkin falling to the floor as he rose. The movement drew the attention of the entire restaurant, conversations dying completely as Hollywood royalty prepared to interact with this unexpected visitor. "It's okay," Brad called to Tony and Philippe, his voice carrying clearly across the restaurant. "Let her come over." The girl's face lit up with surprise and relief. She walked toward the table with careful steps, clearly aware that every eye in the restaurant was upon her. As she approached, Brad could see that despite her circumstances, she had tried to make herself presentable. Her hair was brushed back as neatly as possible, and her hands were clean. "What's your name?" Brad asked gently as she reached the table. "Emma," she replied, standing beside his chair with remarkable composure for someone her age. "Emma Martinez. Well, Emma Martinez, you asked about my leftovers, but I have a better idea." Brad gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Why don't you sit down and order something fresh for yourself?" The girl's eyes widened, and for the first time, her composure cracked slightly. I don't have any money, sir." "That's not what I asked," Brad said with a smile that had charmed audiences for decades, but now carried something deeper, genuine warmth. "I asked if you'd like to sit down and have dinner. The money part is already handled." Emma looked around the table at the three executives, all of whom were staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed discomfort. Then she looked back at Brad, searching his face for any sign that this might be some sort of joke or trick. "You're serious?" she asked quietly. "Dead serious," Brad replied, pulling out the chair beside him. "But I have one condition. You have to tell me how you ended up here, asking about leftovers instead of being home having dinner with your family." Emma hesitated for a moment, then slowly lowered herself into the chair. The leather upholstery, probably worth more than most people's monthly rent, seemed to dwarf her small frame. Philippe appeared at the table with professional speed, clearly uncertain about this unprecedented situation, but determined to maintain service standards. "Shall I bring a menu?" he asked Brad. "Please," Brad replied, then turned to Emma. "But first, how about we start with something to drink? Are you thirsty?" Emma nodded, and for the first time since entering the restaurant, she smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that transformed her entire face and made several nearby diners catch their breath. What none of them knew was that Emma's simple question about leftovers was just the beginning. Her story, which she was about to share with this table of strangers, would reveal circumstances that would challenge everything they thought they knew about poverty, resilience, and the thin line between having everything and having nothing at all. The business dinner had just become something else entirely, something that would be remembered long after contracts were signed and movies were made. Philippe returned with a leather-bound menu, and a crystal glass of water for Emma, who accepted both with a whispered thank you that seemed to surprise him with its genuine gratitude. The other patrons had resumed their conversations, but the volume remained lower than usual, as if the entire restaurant was straining to overhear what would happen next. "Take your time looking at the menu," Brad said, settling back into his chair. "But while you're deciding, I'm curious, how long have you been waiting outside?" Emma took a sip of water before answering. "Since about 4 o'clock. I saw you go in and I thought maybe you might be nicer than most people." "What made you think that?" Janet Walsh asked, her producer's instincts clearly engaged by this unexpected narrative unfolding at their business dinner. "My mum used to watch your movies," Emma said, looking directly at Brad. "She said you always played good guys who helped people. I figured maybe that was real and not just pretend." The simplicity of her logic hit the table like a physical force. Marcus Rodriguez, who had been checking his phone intermittently throughout dinner, put it face down on the table and gave Emma his full attention. "Where is your mom now?" Brad asked gently. Emma's expression grew more serious. "She died 8 months ago. Cancer." She stated it matter-of-factly, the way children often do when discussing incomprehensible tragedy. "The treatments cost a lot of money, and then she couldn't work anymore, so we lost our apartment." The words settled over the table with uncomfortable weight. Sarah Chen reached for her wineglass with slightly shaking hands. "What about your father?" Brad asked. "He left when I was 7, Emma replied, still studying the menu. "Mom said he couldn't handle responsibility. I don't really remember him much. So where are you living now?" This from Janet, whose maternal instincts seemed to be overriding her business focus entirely. Emma hesitated, then seemed to decide on honesty. "Mostly in shelters, but they can only keep you for a few days at a time. Sometimes I sleep in the park or find somewhere safe. I'm good at staying hidden." The casual way she described homelessness made it clear this had become her normal reality. Brad felt something tight and painful forming in his chest, not pity exactly, but a recognition of profound injustice. "Have you decided what you'd like to eat?" he asked, though food suddenly seemed like the least important concern. Emma's eyes had grown wide as she'd perused the menu. "Everything is really expensive," she said quietly. "Maybe just some bread and soup?" "Emma," Brad said, leaning forward slightly, "I want you to order whatever sounds good to you. Don't worry about the price." "When was the last time you had a real meal?" She thought about it seriously. "Sunday, I think. The church on Wilshire serves lunch after service, but you have to sit through the whole thing, and sometimes people ask a lot of questions." Philippa had been hovering discreetly nearby, and Brad caught his eye. "Could you bring Emma the roasted chicken with vegetables and maybe some of that chocolate cake I saw earlier, and keep the bread coming while we wait?" "Excellent choice, sir," Philippe replied, though his usual professional demeanor had been replaced by something warmer. "And perhaps some hot soup to start?" Emma nodded eagerly, and as Philippe disappeared toward the kitchen, she turned back to Brad with an expression of wonder. "You don't even know me," she said. "Why are you being so nice?" It was a question that cut to the heart of something Brad had been struggling with throughout his recent personal difficulties. In a world where headlines focused on celebrity divorces and custody battles, here was a child whose problems made his own seem almost trivial by comparison. "Maybe because you were brave enough to ask for help," he said. "That takes courage. And maybe because everyone deserves kindness, especially kids who have been through what you've been through." Marcus leaned forward. "Emma, you said you've been staying in shelters. Are you there alone?" "Mostly. There's a lady, Mrs. Rodriguez. She's not related, she just has the same last name, who looks out for me sometimes. She's the one who told me about this neighborhood. She said rich people here sometimes help people, but you have to be respectful and not bother them too much." The soup arrived, and Emma's eyes lit up as the warm, rich aroma reached her. She picked up the spoon with careful precision, as if afraid of making a mistake that might end this unexpected kindness. But as she took her first spoonful, something in her expression changed. Her composure, which had been remarkably steady throughout the conversation, finally began to crack. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of warmth, nourishment, and human kindness after months of uncertainty. "Hey," Brad said softly, "you okay?" Emma nodded, trying to smile through her tears. I haven't felt safe in a really long time, and this feels safe." Those words would echo in Brad's mind for years to come, but in that moment, they sparked a decision that would transform not just Emma's evening, but her entire future, and everyone at the table was about to witness something that would remind them why simple human decency matters more than fame, wealth, or any business deal they could ever make. As Emma continued eating her soup with careful, deliberate spoonfuls, as if she wanted to make each bite last forever, the full scope of her situation began to emerge through gentle questions from the adults around the table. "You mentioned Mrs. Rodriguez looks out for you sometimes," Janet said. "Does she know where you are tonight?" Emma shook her head. "She works nights cleaning offices downtown. I usually see her in the mornings at the shelter, but they kicked us out early today because they needed to do fumigation." "Kicked you out?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with concern. "That's just how it works," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "The shelters can't keep the same people every night or they'd get too crowded, so you stay 3 nights, then you have to find somewhere else for at least a week before you can come back. Mrs. Rodriguez taught me which ones are safe and which ones to avoid." The casual way she discussed the logistics of homelessness made it clear that this 12-year-old had developed survival skills that most adults couldn't imagine needing. Brad found himself both impressed by her resilience and horrified by the circumstances that had made such resilience necessary. Philippe appeared with Emma's main course, a perfectly roasted chicken breast with seasonal vegetables, and what looked like the restaurant's signature potato gratin. Emma's eyes widened at the presentation. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "like in magazines." "Go ahead," Brad encouraged. "It's all yours." As Emma began eating with obvious enjoyment, Brad's mind was racing. This wasn't just about providing one meal to a hungry child, though that was important. This was about a 12-year-old navigating an adult world with no safety net, no permanent address, and no guarantee of where her next meal would come from. "Emma," he said carefully, "what do you do during the day? Are you in school?" Her expression grew complicated. "I was until we lost our apartment. I tried to keep going to my old school, but it was too far, and I didn't have bus money. The school counselor said I could transfer to one closer to the shelter, but then we kept moving around and I couldn't keep up with the paperwork." Marcus exchanged a look with the other adults at the table. "So you haven't been in school for how long?" "About 5 months," Emma replied, cutting a small piece of chicken. "I miss it. I was good at reading and math. My teacher, Ms. Patterson, said I was smart enough for advanced classes." The weight of this revelation settled over the table. Here was a clearly intelligent child whose education had been derailed by circumstances entirely beyond her control. Brad felt a familiar emotion rising, the same protective instinct that had driven some of his most passionate film roles, but this time it was real life. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Janet asked, her producer's mind clearly working on multiple levels. Emma's face brightened for the first time since she'd started talking about her circumstances. "A teacher, like Ms. Patterson. She made learning fun and she was always patient, even with the kids who had trouble paying attention. I want to help kids like that." "That's a wonderful goal," Sarah said, and there was something in her voice that suggested Emma's story was affecting her more deeply than she'd expected. Brad leaned back in his chair, studying Emma as she ate. Despite everything she'd been through, losing her mother, becoming homeless, navigating a system that seemed designed to shuffle children like her from place to place, she still dreamed of helping others. The irony wasn't lost on him that here sat a child with more genuine nobility than most of the people he encountered in his daily life. "Emma," he said slowly, "what if I told you there might be a way to help you get back to school and to have a safe place to live?" Emma stopped eating, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we could find you a stable home with people who would take care of you properly and make sure you could go to school regularly?" The hope that flickered across Emma's face was immediately tempered by caution, a reaction that spoke volumes about the disappointments she'd already experienced in her short life. "People have said things like that before," she said quietly. "Social workers and people at the churches. But there are a lot of kids like me and not enough families who want us, especially kids my age. Most people want babies." The matter-of-fact way she discussed her own adoptability, as if she were evaluating market conditions for a commodity, was heartbreaking. But it also revealed something else. This child had developed a remarkably clear-eyed understanding of how the world worked, even when that world had been unfair to her. Brad pulled out his phone. "Emma, would it be okay if I made some phone calls? I know some people who might be able to help." Emma looked around the table at the 3 adults who had listened to her story with such attention and kindness. "You really want to help me? Even though you don't know me?" "Especially because we don't know you," Brad replied. "Sometimes the best reason to help someone is simply because they need help. And you, Emma Martinez, deserve a lot better than what you've been getting." As Brad began scrolling through his contacts, Emma returned to her meal with renewed appetite, but the other patrons in the restaurant were about to witness something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives, a demonstration of how quickly one person's decision to act with genuine compassion can begin to change everything. Brad's first call was to Margaret Chen, a family attorney who had handled sensitive matters for him in the past, including his own custody arrangements. Despite the late hour, she answered on the second ring. "Margaret, it's Brad. I need your help with something urgent." He glanced at Emma, who was listening intently while continuing to eat. "I'm with a 12-year-old girl who's been living in shelters since her mother died. She needs immediate placement somewhere safe, and I want to explore long-term options for her care and education." Margaret's voice was crisp and professional. "Brad, are you talking about adoption? Because that's a complex process that—" "I'm talking about a child who's sleeping in parks because the system has failed her," Brad interrupted. "Right now, I just need to know she has a safe place to sleep tonight, and someone looking out for her welfare. Can you help with that?" "Give me 20 minutes, Margaret replied. "I'll make some calls and get back to you." As Brad ended the call, Emma was watching him with an expression of cautious amazement. "You really meant it," she said softly. "I really meant it," he confirmed, then dialed another number. This call was to James Patterson, a longtime friend who ran a private foundation focused on children's welfare. "James, I need a favor," Brad said when his friend answered. "Actually, I need several favors, and I need them tonight." While Brad explained the situation, the other adults at the table found themselves drawn into an impromptu planning session. Janet, whose own children were grown, was already thinking about educational assessments and tutoring programs. Sarah was researching residential facilities for displaced children on her phone. Marcus was quietly calculating what it might cost to provide comprehensive support for a child Emma's age through high school graduation. Emma, meanwhile, was eating her chocolate cake with obvious delight, occasionally glancing up at the adults who were suddenly reorganizing their evening around her welfare. The transformation in her demeanor was remarkable. The careful guardedness was being replaced by something that looked cautiously like hope. "The cake is really good," she told Philippe when he came to check on the table. "Thank you for bringing it." Philippe smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually formal features. "You're very welcome, Miss Emma. Would you like anything else? Perhaps some hot chocolate?" Emma looked questioningly at Brad, who nodded. "Whatever you'd like, Emma. Tonight you don't have to worry about anything except enjoying yourself." Margaret called back within 15 minutes. "I've spoken with Linda Morrison at Children's Protective Services," she reported. "She's agreed to do an emergency placement with the Wellington foster family. They specialize in short-term care for children in transition. They can take Emma tonight, and they're excellent people. But Brad, you need to understand that long-term solutions will require court involvement and extensive background checks." "Whatever it takes," Brad replied. "What's the next step?" "Linda is driving over to meet you and assess the situation. She should be there in about 30 minutes. In the meantime, Emma needs to know that this is happening and that she has choices in the process." Brad looked at Emma, who had been listening to his side of the conversation with growing wide eyes. "Emma, there's a social worker coming to meet you. Her name is Linda, and she's going to help find you a safe place to stay tonight, with a family who takes care of kids in situations like yours. Would that be okay with you?" Emma set down her fork carefully. "And what kind of family?" "Good people," Brad said. "People who have experience helping children who have been through difficult times. You'd have your own room, regular meals, and they'd help you get back into school." "And after that?" Emma asked. The question revealed both her intelligence and her experience with the temporary nature of most help offered to children in her situation. Brad looked around the table at Janet, Sarah, and Marcus, all of whom were watching this conversation with intense focus. "After that, we figure out the best long-term solution for you. Maybe that's adoption, maybe it's a kinship placement, maybe it's something else entirely. But Emma, I promise you this, you will not be sleeping in parks anymore. Whatever happens from here, you're going to have adults looking out for you properly." The hot chocolate arrived, rich and topped with whipped cream. Emma took a sip and smiled for the first time since the conversation had turned serious. "I haven't had hot chocolate in forever," she said. "My mum used to make it when I was sad about something. She said it was like drinking a hug." The comment hit everyone at the table simultaneously. Here was a child who had lost the one person who had provided unconditional love and protection, and she was facing an uncertain future with remarkable grace and courage. Janet reached across the table and gently touched Emma's hand. "Your mum sounds like she was a wonderful person." "She was," Emma agreed. "She would have liked this. She always said I should accept kindness when it was offered, because there's enough meanness in the world already. As they waited for Linda Morrison to arrive, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: Emma's favorite subjects in school, books she enjoyed reading, places she'd like to visit someday. But everyone at the table was thinking the same thing. How many other children like Emma were out there, navigating impossible circumstances with insufficient support? What they didn't know was that Emma's story was about to take another turn, one that would not only secure her future, but create a ripple effect that would touch countless other lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Linda Morrison arrived precisely when she'd promised, a woman in her 50s with the kind of calm competence that comes from years of handling crisis situations involving children. She approached the table with professional discretion, clearly aware that the unusual circumstances of this case required careful handling. "Mr. Pitt, I'm Linda Morrison from Children's Protective Services." She extended her hand, then turned to Emma with a warm smile. "And you must be Emma. I'm here to help figure out the best way to keep you safe and comfortable." Emma, who had been growing increasingly nervous as the reality of the situation set in, looked questioningly at Brad. "Is she going to take me away now?" "Only to somewhere better than where you've been staying," Linda assured her. "I'd like to talk with you privately for a few minutes, just to make sure you're comfortable with the arrangements Mr. Pitt has proposed. Is that okay?" As Linda and Emma moved to a quiet corner of the restaurant for their conversation, other patrons began to take notice of what was happening. Word had spread quietly through the dining room that Brad Pitt was not just dining with a homeless child, but actively working to change her circumstances. At the table next to theirs, an elderly woman named Dorothy Weinstein had been listening with growing interest. She approached their table hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said to Brad. "I couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation. I'm Dorothy Weinstein. My late husband founded the Weinstein Children's Education Fund. If this young lady needs educational support, I'd like to help." Before Brad could respond, Marcus Rodriguez stood up. "Mrs. Weinstein, I'm Marcus Rodriguez from Universal Studios. If we're talking about supporting Emma's education, my company has scholarship programs that might be applicable." Sarah Chen looked up from her phone. "I've been researching tutoring programs, and I know several excellent educational consultants who could help assess Emma's needs and create a comprehensive plan." Janet Walsh, meanwhile, was making notes on her napkin. "If we're going to do this properly, Emma's going to need more than just housing and education. She'll need counseling, medical care, recreational activities, a complete support system." What was happening was extraordinary. A business dinner at an exclusive restaurant was transforming into an impromptu charitable planning session, with strangers volunteering resources and expertise to help a child they'd just met. Felipe, who had been observing from a professional distance, approached the table. "If I may," he said quietly, "the restaurant would like to contribute as well. We have connections with several local charities that support children in transition." The conversation with Linda took about 15 minutes. When they returned to the table, Emma looked more relaxed, though still somewhat overwhelmed by the attention she was receiving. "Emma has agreed to the foster placement with the Wellington family," Linda announced. "They're expecting us and they're prepared to help her get enrolled in school immediately. Mrs. Wellington is a retired teacher, so she'll be able to assess Emma's educational needs and help her catch up on anything she's missed." Brad felt a wave of relief. "What about longer-term arrangements?" "That will require more time and legal processes," Linda replied. "But Emma has expressed interest in exploring permanent placement options, and given the level of support being offered here, I'm optimistic about finding an excellent long-term solution." Emma looked around the table at all the adults who had suddenly invested themselves in her welfare. "I don't understand why everyone wants to help me," she said quietly. "I'm just one kid." Dorothy Weinstein leaned forward. "Sweetheart, you're not just anything. You're a bright, brave young woman who had the courage to ask for help when you needed it. That takes strength that many adults don't have. And sometimes," Brad added, "helping one person is how we remind ourselves what really matters. You've given all of us something tonight, Emma, a chance to do something meaningful." As the evening wound down, practical arrangements were made. Linda would take Emma to the Wellington family's home, where she would have dinner, though she was thoroughly satisfied from the restaurant meal, and get settled into her temporary room. Brad provided his contact information and made it clear that he wanted to be involved in Emma's ongoing care planning. But the most remarkable thing was watching how the story had begun to spread through the restaurant. Other diners were approaching their table, offering business cards, volunteer opportunities, and resources. Word was already beginning to circulate on social media, not about celebrity drama or scandal, but about an act of genuine human kindness. Emma hugged each of the adults at the table before leaving with Linda. When she reached Brad, she held on a little longer. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening to me like I mattered." "You do matter, Emma," he replied, "more than you know. And this is just the beginning." As they watched Linda's car pull away with Emma safely inside, the adults remaining at the table sat in contemplative silence. The business meeting they'd planned seemed almost trivial now, overshadowed by the profound reminder of what truly deserved their time and attention. But none of them realized that Emma's simple question about leftovers had started something that would continue growing long after she was safely settled with the Wellington family. The story of what had happened that night was about to touch far more lives than anyone could have imagined. 3 days later, Brad received a call that would stay with him forever. It was from Carol Wellington, Emma's temporary foster mother, and her voice was filled with amazement. "Mr. Pitt, I had to call you. Emma's transformation has been remarkable. When Linda brought her here Tuesday night, she was polite but guarded, which is normal for children who have been through trauma. But this morning, she helped me make breakfast and asked if she could call you to say thank you properly." Brad was in his home office reviewing scripts, but Carol's call had his complete attention. "How is she adjusting?" "Beautifully. She's incredibly resilient, but more than that, she's genuinely kind. Yesterday, she noticed our neighbor's elderly dog having trouble with the stairs, and she spent an hour helping Mrs. Patterson carry groceries and walk the dog. She has an instinctive empathy that's quite remarkable." "And school?" "That's why I'm really calling. We had her assessed yesterday, and Brad, this child is gifted. Despite missing 5 months of school, she's testing above grade level in reading and mathematics. With proper support, she could excel academically in ways that will open every door for her future." Brad felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with anger. Satisfaction that Emma's potential was being recognized. Anger that such talent had been at risk of being lost to circumstances beyond her control. What does she need? Stability, primarily, and then educational enrichment. Counseling to help her process her mother's death and the trauma of homelessness, and time to just be a child again. She's been carrying adult responsibilities for months. That afternoon, Brad drove to the Wellington home in Santa Monica. It was a comfortable, modest house with a well-tended garden and the kind of welcoming atmosphere that came from people who had devoted their lives to caring for others. Emma answered the door, and the change in her appearance was striking. She was wearing clean, well-fitting clothes, her hair was neatly braided, and most importantly, she looked rested. The hyper-vigilant wariness that had been evident in the restaurant had been replaced by something approaching normal childhood curiosity. "Brad!" she exclaimed, then caught herself. "I mean, Mr. Pitt. Mrs. Wellington said I should be polite." "Brad is fine," he assured her, accepting her enthusiastic hug. "How are you settling in?" "It's amazing," Emma said, leading him into the living room where Carol Wellington was waiting with coffee and homemade cookies. "I have my own room, and Mrs. Wellington has so many books. She said I can read any of them I want." Carol smiled. "Emma's been reading about 2 hours every evening. She finished an entire novel yesterday, something most high school students would find challenging." As they talked, Brad learned more about Emma's rapid integration into a stable environment. She had been enrolled at Santa Monica Middle School and would start classes the following Monday. A counselor specializing in childhood grief had been arranged. Most importantly, Emma was beginning to believe that this stability might be permanent. "The thing is," Carol explained while Emma was in the kitchen getting more cookies, "Emma needs long-term commitment. She's been disappointed before, and she needs to know that the adults in her life aren't going anywhere. Foster care can provide temporary stability, but Emma needs a permanent family." Brad had been thinking about this constantly since Tuesday night. What would that process look like? Adoption proceedings can take 6 months to a year, depending on the circumstances. Emma has no living relatives willing to take custody, which simplifies some aspects, but also means she's completely dependent on the system finding her the right family. Brad nodded, watching Emma through the kitchen doorway as she arranged cookies on a plate with careful attention to presentation, a small gesture that spoke to her innate dignity and desire to contribute meaningfully to social situations. "Carol, what if I wanted to explore becoming Emma's guardian? Not necessarily adoption immediately, but legal guardianship that would give her permanent stability." Carol's eyebrows rose. "Brad, that's a significant commitment. Guardianship gives you legal responsibility for all aspects of Emma's welfare. Education, medical decisions, daily care, and given your career demands and public profile, there would be additional considerations." "Such as?" Media attention, for one. Emma's story would inevitably become public, and she'd need protection from that kind of scrutiny. Then there's the practical matter of daily care. You travel frequently for work, and Emma needs consistent presence and routine. Emma returned with the cookies, settling beside Brad on the couch with comfortable familiarity. "Mrs. Wellington teaches me something new every day," she said proudly. "Yesterday I learned about compound interest and how savings accounts work. She says understanding money is important for everyone, especially people who haven't had much of it." The comment revealed both Carol's wisdom in preparing Emma for practical adult responsibilities and Emma's eagerness to learn skills that would help her build a secure future. "Emma," Brad said carefully, "how would you feel about staying in Los Angeles permanently, making this your home city?" Emma's face brightened. "Really? I love it here. Mrs. Wellington took me to the beach yesterday, and I had never seen the ocean before. It's so big and beautiful, and the school here seems really good. They have advanced math classes and a library with computers." Over the next hour, they discussed practical matters. Margaret Chen, Brad's attorney, had already begun researching guardianship procedures. The Wellington family was prepared to provide ongoing support during any transition period. Most importantly, Emma herself was enthusiastic about the possibility of having Brad as her legal guardian. "There's something else," Brad said as the visit was winding down. "The story of how we met has started spreading. People want to help, not just you specifically, but other children in similar situations. Would you be comfortable with that attention if it meant helping other kids?" Emma considered this seriously. "My mom always said that if something good happens to you, you should try to make good things happen for other people too. If people want to help other kids because of what happened to me, that seems like a good thing." As Brad prepared to leave, Emma walked him to his car. "Brad," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something important." "What is it?" "When adults say they want to help, sometimes they change their minds when it gets hard or expensive or inconvenient. If you become my guardian, are you going to change your mind?" The question was asked with such directness that it took Brad's breath away. Here was a 12-year-old who had learned to protect herself by managing expectations, even in the face of extraordinary kindness. "Emma," he said, kneeling down to meet her eyes directly, "I don't make promises I can't keep. If I become your guardian, that means I'm committed to being your guardian until you're old enough to be completely independent. It means I'll be there for school plays and parent-teacher conferences and teenage drama and college applications and everything else. It means you'll have someone who will never give up on you, no matter what. Do you understand?" Emma studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand. And Brad, I promise I'll work really hard to make you proud of me." "Emma, you already make me proud, just by being exactly who you are." As Brad drove home, he reflected on how completely his priorities had shifted in just 3 days. The movie projects that had seemed so important on Tuesday night now felt like secondary concerns compared to ensuring Emma's future security and happiness. But what he didn't know was that their story was about to take another turn, one that would not only secure Emma's individual future, but create a lasting impact that would help countless other children facing similar circumstances. The ripple effects of one act of kindness were still spreading, and they were about to reach far beyond anything Brad or Emma could have imagined. 2 weeks later, Brad received a call from Janet Walsh that would change everything. Her voice was excited but slightly breathless, as if she'd been running. "Brad, you need to see what's happening. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? And bring Emma if possible. She needs to see this too." An hour later, Brad and Emma sat in Janet's luxurious Universal Studios office, facing a wall of monitors displaying social media feeds, news websites, and what appeared to be a live fundraising dashboard with numbers that kept climbing rapidly. "It started with Philippe," Janet explained, gesturing to the screens. "He posted about that night on the restaurant's social media, just a simple story about witnessing an act of kindness. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Then Dorothy Weinstein's foundation picked it up, and Marcus's studio shared it on their official accounts." Emma stared at the screens in amazement. "All of this is about what happened at the restaurant." "Not just about it," Janet corrected. "Because of it. Emma, your story has inspired something extraordinary. Look at this." She clicked to a news segment where the anchor was speaking over footage of volunteers sorting donations. "The Emma Effect, as it's being called on social media, has generated over $2 million in donations for children's homeless services in just 2 weeks. But more than that, it's inspired thousands of people to volunteer at local shelters and food banks." The next screen showed a graph with dramatically rising numbers. Adoption applications for older children, kids like you, Emma, have increased by 300% in Los Angeles County alone, and it's spreading to other cities. Brad felt a lump forming in his throat as he watched the footage of families visiting adoption agencies, volunteers serving meals at shelters, and children Emma's age being welcomed into loving homes. "There's more," Janet continued, pulling up another screen. "Remember Sarah Chen from our dinner? She's left her studio job to start a non-profit specifically focused on educational support for homeless children. Marcus has committed Universal to funding a scholarship program. Dorothy's foundation has tripled its annual budget." Emma was quiet, absorbing the magnitude of what she was seeing. Finally, she looked up at Brad. "People are doing all this because I asked for your leftovers." "No," Brad said softly. "People are doing this because your courage in asking for help reminded them that there are thousands of children just like you who need that same help. You became a symbol of something larger." Janet pulled up one more screen, this one showing messages from families who had been directly impacted. "Emma, I want you to read some of these. These are letters from kids who have been helped because of the attention your story brought to their situations." Emma read silently for several minutes, her expression growing more amazed with each message. There were photos of children in new homes, stories of families who had decided to foster or adopt after hearing about Emma's experience, and dozens of accounts of increased funding and volunteer support for children's services. "I don't understand," Emma said finally. "I didn't do anything special, I was just hungry." "That's exactly why it's special," Brad replied. "You showed people that behind every statistic about homeless children, there's a real person with dreams and intelligence and potential. You made it personal for them." Janet leaned forward. "Emma, there's something else. A major television network wants to do a documentary about your story and its impact. They want to follow your journey and show how one act of kindness can create change on a massive scale. But they want your permission, and they want to make sure it's done in a way that protects your privacy while still inspiring others." Emma looked questioningly at Brad. "What do you think?" Brad had been expecting this moment. Emma's story had become bigger than either of them, and the attention would only continue growing. The question was how to manage it in a way that served Emma's best interests, while maximizing the positive impact for other children. "I think," he said carefully, "that if you're comfortable with it, this could be a way to help even more kids. But Emma, you need to understand that once this story is told publicly, your life will never be completely private again. People will always know who you are and how we met." Emma considered this seriously. "Will it help other kids like me?" "Based on what's already happened, yes. Probably a lot of other kids." Emma nodded decisively. "Then we should do it. My mom always said that if you can help people, you should help people. And if telling my story helps other kids find families and get help, then that's what I want to do." As they left Janet's office, Brad realized that Emma had already grasped something that had taken him years to understand. That privilege and platform come with responsibility, and that the most meaningful use of both is in service of others who need advocates. But the most profound moment was still to come, one that would reduce not just Brad and Emma to tears, but eventually millions of people who would witness it. The culmination of their story was about to unfold in a way that neither of them expected, creating a moment of pure human connection that would be remembered long after the headlines faded. 6 months later, on a warm September evening, Brad stood at the back of the packed auditorium at UCLA's Royce Hall. The event was the premiere of Finding Home: The Emma Martinez Story, the documentary that had followed Emma's journey from that night in the restaurant to her new life as Brad's legally adopted daughter. The film had been completed just the week before, and tonight would be the first time either Brad or Emma saw the finished product. The proceeds from the premiere would go directly to the Emma Martinez Foundation for Homeless Children, which had been established with the initial $2 million raised from Emma's story and had since grown into a national organization. Emma, now 13, and glowing with the confidence that comes from security and love, sat in the front row wearing a simple blue dress that Carol Wellington had helped her choose. She had grown 3 inches since that March evening. Her hair was longer and healthier, and most importantly, she carried herself with the assured posture of a child who knew she was valued and protected. "Nervous?" Brad asked, sliding into the seat beside her as the lights began to dim. "A little," Emma admitted. "It's weird seeing your life turned into a movie, even when it's a documentary." As the film began, the audience watched Emma's story unfold. From her first appearance outside the restaurant, through the dinner conversation, to the legal proceedings that had made Brad her permanent guardian, and finally, to the national movement that had grown from their chance encounter. But the most powerful moment came near the end of the film, when the camera captured something that had happened just a month earlier. Emma had returned to the same shelter where she had lived during some of her most difficult days, but this time as a volunteer, helping other children. The documentary showed Emma sitting with a boy about her age named David, who had recently lost his mother and was facing the same uncertain future she had once faced. The camera captured the moment when Emma took his hand and said, "I know it feels like nobody cares about you right now, but that's not true. There are people who will help you, just like someone helped me. You just have to be brave enough to let them." In the theater, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even the seasoned film industry professionals who attended premieres regularly were visibly moved by the authenticity of Emma's connection with David and the other children she was helping. But the most emotional moment came during the Q&A session after the film, when a woman in the audience stood up to speak. "Emma," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "my name is Linda Morrison. I'm the social worker who came to the restaurant that night to help arrange your foster care." Emma's face lit up with recognition. "Ms. Linda, I remember you. I wanted you to know," Linda continued, "that in the 6 months since your story became public, my department has placed more children in permanent homes than we had in the previous 2 years combined. More than that, we've seen a fundamental shift in how people think about older children in the foster system. You've changed countless lives, not just by sharing your story, but by showing people that every child deserves a chance." Emma stood up, tears streaming down her face, and the entire auditorium erupted in applause that lasted nearly 5 minutes. When the audience finally quieted, Emma spoke into the microphone that had been brought to her. "I just want to say thank you to everyone who helped me, starting with Brad, who listened to me when I was just a hungry kid asking for leftovers. But mostly, I want to say something to any kids who might be watching this who are in situations like I was in." She paused, looking directly into the camera that was broadcasting the event live. "You matter. Your dreams matter. Your future matters. And there are people who will help you if you're brave enough to ask. Don't give up because your story isn't over yet. Mine wasn't over that night in the restaurant, and yours isn't over either." The audience rose to its feet again, but Brad's attention was focused entirely on Emma. In that moment, he realized that while he had initially seen himself as rescuing her, the truth was far more complex. Emma had saved him too, reminding him of what truly mattered, and giving his life a purpose that went far beyond entertainment and celebrity. After the event, as they drove home to the house in Santa Monica that was now legally Emma's permanent address, Emma was quiet, processing the evening's events. "Brad," she said finally, "do you think my mom would be proud of how everything turned out?" Brad pulled the car over and turned to face his daughter, because that's what she was now, in every way that mattered. "Emma, I think your mom would be amazed by the incredible young woman you've become and the way you've used your experiences to help other children, but mostly, I think she'd be proud that you never lost your kindness, even when the world wasn't very kind to you." Emma nodded, then smiled. "I'm glad I asked you for your leftovers that night." "So am I," Brad replied. "So am I." As they resumed the drive home, neither of them could have imagined that Emma's simple question about leftovers would ultimately lead to the placement of over 3,000 children in permanent homes, the establishment of educational programs in 12 states, and a fundamental shift in how society approaches child homelessness. But perhaps more importantly, it had created a family, not through traditional means, but through the recognition that love and commitment can transcend biology when they're grounded in genuine care and mutual respect. Emma's story had begun with a question about food, but it had become something much larger, a testament to the transformative power of human kindness and the extraordinary things that can happen when someone with privilege chooses to use it in service of someone without it. The girl who had once asked for leftovers had become a voice for thousands of children who needed advocates, and the movie star who had simply decided to listen had discovered that his most important role would never appear in any film credits. It would be written in the life of the daughter he gained and the countless children whose lives were changed because of the choice he made that March evening to treat one hungry child with dignity and compassion. Their story had come full circle, but its impact would continue rippling outward for generations to come, proving that sometimes the most important conversations begin with the simplest questions And the most profound changes start with one person deciding to care about another person's welfare. Emma Martinez had asked for leftovers and received a future. In return, she had given the world a powerful reminder of what humanity looks like when it chooses compassion over indifference, action over apathy, and love over fear.